Hey, 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 and we are back for another episode of the Musician's Personal Development Podcast. I am CC Bass.
And this is Wil Cameron.
And we are two seasoned musicians here to bring you the best actionable tips to help you get to your best musician self.
That's
and
right.
Today we are going to talk about nonverbal communication. So important and very effective with helping you to elevate as a musician. And why we're talking about it, there's a statistic out there. I don't know if you know the statistic. It's something like 75% or 90% of all communication is nonverbal.
Yes.
It actually applies to music as well.
Yes.
And so, what do you know anything about that, or with that statistic? Have you heard with that?
It's a really small, insignificant amount of content that people actually receive. Most of it, they're not even paying attention to you. Something
Right.
like 25% of the time people are talking, they only hear 25% of what you say.
Right, exactly. So, in the context of this show here, we're speaking of in an actual performance setting. So that's what we're talking about. So nonverbal communication in a performance setting, and it's not just for like jazz and pop musicians like Wil and I. It's more it can be across the board.
Right.
I have a cousin who's she's a violin player for the Marian Anderson Quartet. We'll get into conversations. She's provided me a lot of tips of how communication goes, nonverbal communication goes in her world. She even, how you have the quartet, they sit in the U shape, but
Yes.
they're all like making eye contact. And she
Yes.
was telling me the way they set the tempo is through breathing. They
Yes.
do a thing like, and so I just thought that was cool. And so that's part of the reason why it inspired me to cover a bit of this. But there's just some examples I've seen lately of how important it is, and I get people that ask me, well, gosh, you've never played with these musicians before. How do you make that all come together? Right.
We hear that. And what's funny, I didn't know you were going to use that example. It's another chamber music group where they actually wired them up with microphones and things to measure how much they moved, and they could actually gauge how much tempo, whether the music, even little things like whether the music was happy or sad based on their movement and stuff. And it's like you don't even know that's happening. You're kind of unconsciously or subconsciously watching them, and you have this awareness of what they're doing and what they're performing. And it is weird when people come up to you afterwards and say, well, how did you know that was going to happen? Or how do you guys do that?
Right. And so I also get this with, musicians I've never played with before, but you were put together in a setting and, there's no rehearsal, not a whole lot of talking about what we're going to do. It's just going to happen, and it's going to happen through the nonverbal piece. And so it's pretty powerful when you can understand that and being able to communicate with that in that way. So, Wil, what do you know about this? I know you have a lot to say. Give us some of your brainiac.
Yeah, this is crazy. I don't want to nerd out too much on people, but this is crazy. So, as a drummer and a percussionist, I've always said everybody is a drummer. So some of us play drums better than others, but everybody who has a heartbeat is a drummer. And there's been a ton of research done on this. And we talked earlier just briefly where behavioralists have studied this for a while and talking about how drums started out by communicating from one tribe to the next, or one large group of people to the next. And in some of the spiritual songs, through a vibe or through music, people were able to communicate. And rolling forward to like middle history, so to speak, through the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, they had these little boys. They weren't men; they were little boys, because if they were men, they'd give them guns and they'd have to fight and stuff. They're these little boys who were drummers, and these drummers were what the armies used to communicate whether they should advance and different locations of where they were moving, and more importantly, when they needed to run. And consequently, a lot of young men who were drummers were killed because the armies figured out, well, hey, if we kill the drummers, then the armies don't know where to work. You have to remember context, right? They didn't have radar. They didn't have walkie-talkies and radios. They couldn't call each other on phones. There were no helicopters. It's just a whole bunch of fog of war. So, and prior to that, the Chinese had their war drums, like I think it's called the Zhangju or something like that, and it's the drum of war. But I'm getting too nerdy, so I'll
I didn't know you were going to go into the Chinese war. Okay, well that's great.
But like bringing forward here, but more of what you see now, and I'm in the D.C. area with CC, and what we see in this area are these drum circles, and maybe you've seen in a park where you see 3 or 4 people and they're just playing a rhythm together, and maybe somebody's dancing. Well, Remo, the drum maker and drum head maker, who has been around for a long, long time, worked with a number of healthcare practitioners, and they came up with what they called their Health Rhythms program. And through this Health Rhythms program, they created this evidence-based process or protocol where people can use drum circles to help lower people's blood pressure, reduce stress. And what's really magical about this is I've participated in some of these drum circles as a facilitator, if you can imagine that, where we've actually gotten children, people who are nonverbal, or people who have other issues where they're like almost antisocial. You give them a shaker or an instrument, and they're in this drum circle, and they're just going to town communicating with everybody else, because in a drum circle, everybody has an equal voice. And there are all of these health things that come out of that I don't have time to go into, but if you go to the Remo site and you look up Health Rhythms, I'll put it on there. It's got a lot more information about that. But as Cece talked about today, we talk about conveying information in a more of a band context or in a gig where, you can't talk. I mean, you can't express it. You've got your instrument. There's a lot of noise. There's an audience watching you. So this program is more about communicating in that context and how we touch the audience as well as our bandmates and things like that. And there are other studies that I won't go into, but I was able to, I've got like a couple of examples, one good example of how this worked for me, if I can share this with you. So again, we're talking about nonverbal communication. So I'm at this gig, and I've used this example before, but I didn't explain why it happened. I'm at this gig, all the lights go out and everything. It's a normal gig. It's a pretty good sized room. There are a bunch of people. We're like midways in the gig, and there's a storm or something going on, and all the lights go off, and people are starting to get up and move around and stuff like that. So I start playing drums, and the musicians that were with me, they instinctively, somebody grabbed one of like a tambourine I had, and somebody grabbed something else, and they're like playing hand percussion, and we're playing drums. So we're going at this for like 2 minutes now, 2.5 minutes. We're going. People are starting to dance, and they're clapping and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden the lights come on, and they said they started clapping, and then they started complaining and saying, "Turn the lights off, turn the lights off." So they wanted us to go back to doing that. So I accidentally did that the right way once, and then there have been like at least 3 other times that I've had that kind of situation where there's been a major audio faux pas, where the PA system has failed or something has gone wrong. I just start playing drums without even talking to the other musicians. They kind of like see what's going on. They jump on the bandwagon, and everybody turns into a drummer. And it just happens to work the right way. So that's a really simple version. But nobody practiced that. Nobody says that. We all just know because we all have that same presence of mind as a group, and we communicate it that way. So before we talk about the bad examples, do you have any good or bad examples to share, CC?
So lots of good examples because you're using it all the time. But I'll probably just give an example of how there can be a miscommunication even through nonverbal communication. Yeah, I've had one even in recent months where I was doing I don't know, it was a simple jazz tune, but something happened in the song that kind of was throwing folks off, and that the other band members off, and so we were kind of looking to the guitar player at the time to kind of lead us and get us back on track. Well, it's not professional to say, "Hey, we're at bar 2," So there's some communication that verbal things you can be verbal, subtle. And you don't necessarily want to do that because the music, like you were saying, Will, can drown you out and you can't really hear anyway. Like
right.
B sounds like E, like play an E flat. It sounds like a B flat, sounds like a C flat, D flat. It all sounds the same. So there's got to be other ways to do it. So anyway, what happened was we were in different places of the music. And so we're looking to the guitar player to kind of get us back on track. But all he was doing, he was looking at us. And I was confused, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with that because he was looking at us throughout the whole time. I mean, he would give certain looks, and sometimes that can mean something, sometimes it doesn't. So I didn't really know how to read that, and so we were like in different places of the song. So that's a way that a miscommunication can come.
Oh yeah, man, I've been there. Like as a rhythm player, you can see that people are in different places, right? And you think, oh my goodness, and you can't tell them, follow her or follow him. You're just, that's just, I kind of cringe thinking about that.
Yeah, there are professional ways to handle that. So there's one thing would go to the top. There's the way I handle that. I just went into I'm trying to say a repetitive pattern, so folks can get the repetitive pattern going, and then the horn player can come back to the top of the head when he's ready, and then we all know where we are. So that's kind of the way I handle it.
And you just did a signal there. So let's go into the topics because you just accidentally just did like the first actionable thing that we were going to talk about.
Okay, so the first tip that leads us right into is know the common nonverbal communication, like gestures. They can be very obvious gestures, or they can be kind of subtle. But they vary. I mean, common ones are like this one means we're coming to the end, and this one obviously means go back to the head.
While you were talking, you were saying I was in this repetitive loop. And I just like went back to the head, and it's like, so we just automatically do it. Mm-hmm. I was on a gig, and they invited this guest guitar player up, and I wasn't familiar with him because I didn't play that type of music very much, but everybody knew who he was, and he had this thing where he did this stomp. He like his left leg. He raised his leg up and stomp, and that meant something. And everybody would go to like the bridge or whatever. And so I'd never played with this person before. I was just kind of subbing in the group. But with his stomp, I knew non-verbally something's gonna happen. I gotta watch people, right? And then I just kind of learned that, he showed up again. He did the same stomp. It's like, but that was his thing. So, so when you see a stomp, when you see a wave, when you see somebody blinking their eyes or somebody nodding their head excessively or something, it kind of looks crazy sometimes, but it's how we communicate. So that's number one.
When you were talking about the foot stomping, that reminded me of James Brown, because that's what he did. He did a lot of and it always meant something different, something that the musicians should do. So
right, and it's funny. He was a tough leader. I mean, he would be doing the same thing, and you'd have to know what he meant each time he did it. So if you wanted to play with James Brown,
Yeah. So the second one is to listen, because the gesture, sometimes it's not going to be in the form of gestures. Sometimes it's listening. And I'll give an example. I played a gig with a blues guy at a blues festival a few months back, and was playing with the drummer, And not once did I ever look at him because I didn't need to. I was just listening to what he was doing. He was listening to what I was doing, and we were just there, you know,
There.
we were here, you know. So and it worked, and it was just a matter of listening. So that is a way of communicating too. If he would shift something in his beat, or if I would shift something in my rhythm, you know, we would go together. He would follow, or I would follow, and we you know, and it was just a great chemistry. So when you know that, you can understand that. I mean, it works out well, and it's also obvious when folks are not good with that, or they're used to playing by themselves, or they're just not, you know, they're not as experienced with that because you're doing these little gestures or doing these little things that they're not really picking up on. So another reason why this is important, so we can all come together.
Yes, that is very important. Now, and I love your example because we've done that too. And believe it or not, we actually do this a lot more. You and I do more than we ever play together. Right?
Yeah, right,
and
right,
it's like
right.
when we play together, it's almost like we kind of know each other. We just kind of play and listen. And I like the way you said that. And you know, and to put infinite emphasis on be confident in what you play. So own what you play, but still listen. Don't just have somebody dragging you around. You still need to be confident in what you play as a musician. And the other piece that you brought up that I'd like to highlight is many of us are practicing with soundtracks and videos and things like that because that builds proficiency. But there is a great difference between playing with the video and playing with the person. So that listening part, that probably is super essential, and not just like with the musicians. Sometimes it's with the audience, like watching and observing them. I mean, because they're part of what's going on here too. So that being confident in what you play and listening is like spot on.
You brought up something that's also important that I didn't think about, that you know, the difference between when you're playing by yourself versus playing with others. So if you're practicing all by yourself, but you're not one to really get out and play with other musicians, this is why it would be important is to learn how to communicate with the other musicians, because you can play something by yourself till you're blue in the face, but when you get in a setting with other folks, you know, and playing that it's going to be different. So an example, sometimes I like to play along with the radio, you know, and that's good. The song goes the same way every time. You know, or I'm playing to a backing track. It goes the same way every time. But what if something, you know, another musician wants to change things up? You gotta be, know enough to be able to shift. Yeah,
absolutely. And different versions of things with different bands. So bands tend to play the same songs, but they play them differently.
Yes,
in different keys. Mm-hmm. So you can't just look at the set list and say, oh, I know that. Oh, yeah, I know that. You have to listen to the version that they're playing because,
right.
I mean, yeah, you're skillful, but you know, to the difference between good and great is going to be this. So that's very good. That's a good one. And that kind of leads into to the last tip, right?
Yeah, the last one is be present. You know, it kind of goes without saying, you know, if you're walking into a situation where you're playing a gig and you've never played with the musicians before, they may not have the usual signals, or they're doing other things to signal what they mean, and you've got to be paying attention, have an optic on them, be looking, and you know, be aware of what's going on, because that's going to indicate, you know, where you need to go in the music. So I give you an example. The same festival, the leader, he was a guitar player and the singer, and he was using his own little cues, but not. And he would do it behind his back. He would do this thing where he was like this, and it meant one thing, and he was trying to be subtle about it, but you know, you got to be paying attention and looking. You can't be off here.
Yes.
Because he wants to go to the next section. I've seen things where the music is just going on. You know, you've played through a couple verses, you've gone to the bridge, and then you're just kind of looping solos are, and then the singer might want to go back to the bridge. You know, I've seen it where this means go back to the bridge, or you know, this means go to the next section. Yeah. So you gotta be present, because you know, there are common gestures and things that happen, but there are the ones that where folks are using their own, and you got to kind of adapt on the spot.
That's true. That's very true. And so much of it is attitude, because, I mean, I'm guilty of zoning out sometimes. If it's, we've both been on these gigs where there's like 17 horn players and everybody takes a solo, and it just gets repetitive. So much is attitude, where you have that presence of what's going on around you. And part of it of that attitude is like what you bring to the gig. So you're not sitting there thinking about, did I close the garage door before I left, or turn the stove off? Or if there's a disagreement about something, let's say somebody doesn't show up, or a song isn't done, or there's a little dust up or disagreement among musicians, all of that stuff has to go away, because your presence is not open to be able to communicate. Especially if I'm not liking CC because she insulted me prior to the gig and said, I don't like your shirt, and oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you we got to play for 3 hours instead of 2. I got to like compartmentalize that and put that someplace else, because I'm not going to be open to those subtle cues that she's giving me, or that she would normally give me. And it's so much bigger than you as an individual. You have such a greater impact when you work as a team or a group of musicians. And that's what all of this nonverbal stuff is about. That's why drum circles, the largest one I've ever been in, had about 350 people at the cathedral in Washington, D.C. 350 people playing drums inside the Catholic cathedral, because we were all listening to each other, if you can imagine that. So,
wow.
So,
yeah.
We've kind of gone up to our limit here. We, didn't mean to drag it out so much with the nerdy stuff, but I don't get a chance to do this very often. So, regardless of the tips or the techniques that you use, we'd like for you to remember these 3. Number 1 is, go ahead.
The number 1 is know the common ways of nonverbal communication in music yes. setting. Number 2 is listen. All right. Number 3 is be present. And also understand that what we've mentioned in this episode here actually ties back to an earlier episode that we covered, which was how to communicate with the audience.
Connecting with the audience.
Connecting with the
Absolutely.
audience, yes. Yeah.
Yep. So the best approach for all of this, like in a nutshell, is to just remain calm, attentive, and flexible, and try to relax, and just and let your instrument do the talking for you. Before you know it, that's what's going to happen for you.
Yep, and have some freaking fun.
No.
Yeah. All right. So so I think that's all for today. So again, if you like what you've heard today, please don't forget to subscribe to us at the link below. And also, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at MPD Podcast. And also, shoot us an email if you have an idea, if you want to share your story. We're at mpdpodcast@gmail.com. And I think that is a wrap for us.
All right.
Yeah. So our two seasoned musicians, and I am CC Bass.
And Wil Cameron.
And we are out of here. I'm going to teach you some dance moves here.